with the barbell challenge that I decided to embark on, it basically came about from the towards the back end of COVID, around about October 2020, and I kind of wanted to reevaluate my fishing. I thought I was doing quite a few things that were fairly similar, and I was finding myself in a bit of a rut. So it gave me a bit of time for reflection when we weren't able to get onto the rivers and to the still waters for my normal fishing, for bream and tench, for example. So sat down with a pen and paper and decided to have a look to see what I could do. I do love my barbel fishing, always have done, but I used to do it on just a very select few rivers. Growing up in London, I had the likes of the River Wandle, which was pretty much on my doorstep, and that's where I like to think I cut my teeth in terms of fishing for barbel. Sight fishing is probably, on them sort of rivers, probably the most exhilarating type of barbel fishing you can undertake. When I was going through the list of rivers, I was actually quite surprised just how many actually held double figure fish. I was actually quite surprised that I think it's around about 54 different rivers across the country. Some are not quite well known for those sorts of like big double figure fish. You know, you get some rivers that are like flash in the pans. They're not really renowned for big fish. But I thought a list quite similar to what we have listed here, you know, it gives you a good idea on actually what is possible. Some pretty close to where I live down in Kent. Unfortunately, some of them are a lot further afield. So a lot of driving's involved, a lot of time's invested into it as well. And touching on what I said something previously, obviously being quite busy with work and family, have to bear in mind the balance that everything has to be taken into account. Some of the closer rivers to me, I also had the luxury of being able to go on, say I'd finish work at 2, 3, 4 o'clock. I'd have the opportunity to drop onto the likes of the Colne, the Colnbrook, the Lee, the Thames, where I could be finishing work and having a rod or two out, probably within about 45 minutes of finishing work. So I was quite fortunate in that respect that over a period of 3 years I was able to chalk off a few of those rivers. As for some of those rivers a little bit more further afield, a lot of fortune has to come about, but also the time invested as well. You think driving to the Dearne, the Derwent, for example, for me is anything between 3 and 4 hours worth of driving each way. So it's a lot of time that has to be put into those sessions. So they were never going to be day trips. They were something that you had to plan well in advance to make sure that they fitted in and around the diary. With obviously with accommodation and things like that, obviously trying to keep the costs down as well. You want to just make sure that you're limiting the amount of expenditure, and it can get quite expensive, especially when you take into account things like fuel, food and drink for your stay. If obviously it's pretty cold and you don't want to be kipping in your car when it's -2 outside, it's not particularly pleasant. So obviously finding digs as well can quite often add another 50 to 70 quid per night for the time that you're spending up in places like Yorkshire, Lancashire, for example. With some of the rivers that you see listed here, I haven't achieved some of them, and they will hopefully over the course of the next 2 to 4 seasons, which is the sort of time frame I'm looking to have the remainder completed. I will, sorry, I've just lost that there. I will look to hopefully get around about 4 to 6 rivers per season for the remaining amounts chalked off. I'm just looking here. So if you want to go to the next one. So we just move on now to some of the rivers that I've moved, so I've completed. So we're going on to the likes of this one here. For some of you who may have fished the River Loddon, which is in Berkshire, you may recognise the solar panel farm in the distance. The access to the Loddon during the winter, which is where I spent most of my campaign back in 2022-23 winter, was spent fishing floodwaters, and it was not easy fishing, very difficult access to the bank. So obviously being as safe as possible was something that was paramount in mind. But it did give you some very, very, very interesting issues to overcome. And as you can see here, fishing in floodwater, freezing cold as well. But unfortunately, given the lack of time available, I had to just, hope for the very best, put all my knowledge to the test and see whether I could actually come up trumps. Scroll it back a little bit, so we go into the starting point. So before I started the challenge, as I say, I'd fished a few rivers previously, and Hampshire Avon being where I had my personal best fish, which was caught back in 2012. I wanted to build upon that and thought the 40 Rivers Challenge might actually be a very crazy challenge, but one that was certainly possible. So I used this as my springboard, to which over the course of the challenge I will improve upon these as well, or add them within the challenge time frame. So yeah, as you can see with the challenge, it takes you to various different types of rivers, whether they're big spate rivers, huge expanses of water like the Trent, the Thames, the Ribble, or as you can see from the image on the top right, some of you who are up in the Manchester area might recognise that. That's the diminutive River Tame that is just on its way into where it joins the Goyt and then creates the River Mersey. Bottom left, we have a very, very tight swim on the River Nene, not for the faint-hearted. And on the right, we have the River Ribble, which is not quite up to the banks, but it had quite a bit of cold water going through it. And it just gives you an idea on the different types of rivers that I will be faced with over the course of the challenge. So it's trying to adjust my approaches to catch fish in all sorts of conditions all throughout the year. And it's not a case of just one tactic fits all. It's a case of just trying to work out what is best for the time of the year, and also if the rivers are clear, can I actually opt a way of catching fish by stalking, whether it's rolling meat or just very light link ledgers. On the bigger rivers that are in flood, something that Ian would have touched on earlier, so bigger smelly baits giving you the opportunity to hopefully bring fish up onto you. So for the first one, the first season of the challenge, so I started in October 2020 season, sorry. As you can see, I fished 29 sessions with 26 blanks. Now, that was mostly on the River Colne, which I don't know if any of you guys have fished previously, but it's not an easy place to fish. And during the winter, where I didn't know anything about the river, I found myself going there after work 2 or 3 hours each time and just coming away with absolutely nothing, not learning an awful lot. I felt that I was stuck in a bit of a rut. And I saw out the rest of the season until the last day, just trying to find a glimmer of hope, maybe just a fish here or there. And on the Colne, I did manage one about £7 heading up towards the last few days of the season. But that last 4 months of the season was punctuated with a trip to the River Trent, obviously quite local to here, just a bit further up away from Nottingham, where I had a fish of 13.9. And the Sussex Ouse, which actually I still hold my personal best fish of 15.12. That came there after a few very short trips after work. The Sussex Ouse being quite close to home as well, it was pretty straightforward in order for me to make that journey up in order to try and cut my teeth on that river to try and find myself a barbel. And I got quite fortunate that my first fish out of the river actually turned out to be what is now still a personal best. The River Trent, I spent a couple of trips at Collingham. I found it quite uninspiring, me personally, because I do love my small intimate rivers, and I just felt casting out into a massive expanse of water isn't really what I enjoy about barbel fishing, but I know that I don't speak for everybody. The more intimate rivers where you're actually fishing towards very, very small populations of fish, I just feel that it's definitely my sort of angling. But for the challenge, it's an absolute necessity, and much like the Trent, the Thames and the Ribble are really big rivers that I had to work out and try and catch fish from as well. Those are the two fish that I had on those on the Trent and the Sussex Ouse. It's not often you get a smile out of me with teeth in it. So you can tell I was pretty pleased with that one. So we move on to the 21-22 season. So obviously where I started in October of 2020, I was at that point where we'd already missed all the warmer months, and it becomes a little bit more difficult to try and work out different rivers. So I started the new season of the 21-22 with a bit of wind in my sails, having done the Trent and the Sussex Ouse. So very quickly I got to purchasing tickets on the Colne, the Medway, where thankfully it didn't take too long in order to get those under my belt. And you can see the number of blanks to sessions fished were actually starting to improve. It might not look it with 37 out of 51, but I felt I was making headway. And by the end of the season, I'd actually managed to chalk off 8 different rivers, covering, as you can see, so from the Colne and Medway, quite close to London, and the Mole, and then catching fish from places like the Ivel, which is notoriously difficult over the recent years for reasons that most of you probably know. Things like predation have obviously not helped, being quite a diminutive river. I didn't think I was going to be chalking that off on my very first visit. So it was one of those strokes of luck that you kind of hope for when you're making those sorts of journeys. The Derwents, I probably had my best session that I've ever had in fishing in total. I couldn't believe how, I won't say easy, because that's probably the wrong way of wording it, but I felt very fortunate to come away with what I did. Which I'll touch on just a little bit more in the next slide. But the Warwickshire Avon, again, was quite fortunate. I joined a good friend of mine on the Warwickshire Avon, just down from Leamington, and managed a nice 12-6 barbel pretty much within the hour. And by that point, I already had my eyes set on going somewhere else. A lot of people would think, wow, going to the Warwickshire Avon, catching a double within an hour, you'd think, well, you'd probably want to stay a little bit longer and see what else you could catch, but I just thought, no, it's got to move on. So I drove to the Severn and hoped for the very best there. So that was 13 of my 40 completed, and there's only 27 rivers to go. As you can see, not all my trips actually pan out. The River Severn had been a thorn in my side for some time, and I was quite dejected after about 3 or 4 trips on the River Severn. Fishing the lower, it can be quite daunting, especially when you don't know it. And that is one of the issues that has come about, and something that I've recognised over the last 3 years, that for a travelling angler who doesn't really have that experience of certain rivers, it can be quite daunting. So I can see why many people do have their favourite rivers and will potentially just stick with those and not move around. But for me, the River Severn was one that I felt that a double figure fish, especially on the lower, was a real possibility. But I had to endure some tough sessions as well. That's how I feel sometimes, because it is hard graft, and especially when it's freezing cold, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It's pitch black. It's -3 already. There's ice on the line and eyes. It's not pleasant, but as I said before, it's just finding every single bit of time that's absolutely possible and just maximizing it, because in time, these sessions do pan out. Yeah, that probably wasn't one of my finest moments, I've got to be honest. Fishing at Bridgnorth on the Middle Severn, I decided that it'd be a good idea to drive down to the river's edge, and it was great. The ground was firm, there was no rain, but as soon as you get fishing, you're blinkered. You're not paying attention to what's going on around you. It was chucking it down with rain. Obviously, I didn't think anything of it until it's time to pack up and go home, and then realised I couldn't actually leave. So 4 hours of swearing and 80 quid lighter to get towed out, to which my rescuer almost got bogged in the field himself. Yeah, that was not impressive. I was not happy with myself, but we all live and learn. I won't make that mistake again, I promise. So here's just a collection of the fish that I had across that season. So as you can see, quite a few of them were in the warmer months between July and September, and a couple of winter fish there as well. The bottom one on the left was the Warwickshire Avon fish. I was particularly happy with that because I had no expectations of arriving on a river and achieving what I wanted so quickly. It's not something I thought possible, but winding it back just a few months and doing what I did on the Ival, I thought, actually, do you know what? These sorts of things are possible, and with a huge slice of fortune, I could come away with what I was after. Something I touched on recently was the trip to the Derwents. It's not something that I necessarily expected to happen, because the previous day I'd gone on to a section on the Earl of Harrington, never fished it before, and I thought to myself, let's just get some bait out, get some rods out, did a little bit of a recon, and was quite happy with where I was. Fished the afternoon and the night through to about 2 a.m, and I thought, you know what, no, this is not happening. So I packed away and decided just to keep in the car for the night, just to keep the costs down, as I was saying earlier on, and just set the alarm with just before sunrise to go at it and just take it at a different slant. So I left all of the static gear in the car. I thought to myself, do you know what, let's just back to basics, single rod, landing net, couple of tins of lunch and meat, and I went rolling meat for the morning. And what happened for the following 2 hours actually blew my mind. I'm not a stranger to big chub, but it's not something that I expected to happen. The top left one was a chub that I managed, weighing in at 6'7", which was actually announced under my personal best at the time. About an hour later, again on the rolling meat, that big grin, the one in the middle with that barbel, weighing just under 14 pounds, for an August fish as well. I thought it was quite impressive. It was in really good condition, and the fight on it was pretty impressive. And then leading down to what is actually still my current personal best chub of 7'4", it really did open my eyes as to actually what was possible on that river, because beforehand I had no idea that actually it held that sort of stamp of fish. So I was quite surprised. But the story briefly on that was actually quite strange, because before I went up and had the chub and the barbel in the middle, I had actually found a solitary barbel in the middle of this gravel run towards the bottom of the stretch, and I was rolling meat to it and had no chance in catching it. Just was not interested. So when I'd had the chub and the barbel, I decided to go back down, being greedy. On my way back to the car, I thought, you know what, I'll go back and have that barbel that was in the middle there and see if it fancies having a go. And I was rolling down to it on the first run, and a silhouette came from underneath my feet and T-boned the barbel that was in the middle of the gravel run, and decided to collar the meat instead. So I was quite surprised by that, and it's one of the only times I've actually not effing and blinded when I've actually had a chub knock a barbel out the way. So the season wrapped up in 21-22 with a quick trip to the Way, which I managed to chalk off on my first trip back in search of barbel, and that was on the last day of the season. So I'd actually finished off the season with 18 rivers down the hatch. So I thought to myself, do you know what, that's given me a great springboard to actually go on to the next season and put some more time in. With this one here, as you can see, just before I go through the rivers, the miles travelled, over the course of the 3.5 seasons so far that I've travelled, I've done just under 18,000 miles worth of driving. That's not including any of my pursuits for rudd, for grayling. It's a serious undertaking, and I think by the time that I get to the 40 rivers, it's just a conservative estimate, but it'll probably be in the region of about 40,000 miles. So you can imagine it's quite a lot of time spent on the roads as well, getting to these destinations. Once the 40 rivers is completed, it's not something that I would want to revisit in any other capacity. But my love for barbel has pushed me to this point, and obviously where I'm currently sat, it's not something that I would stop. It'll go all the way through. Well, we'll touch on the 22-23 season. So I made quite a few trips up towards over to Wales and up to the north as well, because I was starting to exhaust the rivers a bit closer to home, which is always the threat. Once obviously you start to get all those within a 60-mile radius of where I'm living, I then know that I've got to do a lot more driving, and there's a lot more variables in play where I might not actually catch for lots and lots of effort. The Mersey, I got Jerry to thank for that one, because he put me with some very good information, and within, I think it was 48 minutes, I'd already caught what I was after in the shape of a 10-10 barbel, and I didn't think again that I would be able to chalk it off that quickly. So I was pleased as punch with that. The trip to the Dern was quite an interesting one. I'd previously done 3 trips on there with only 1 small barbel, and I really didn't think that there was an awful lot there for me to target. The otters on there had done a hell of a lot of damage, and it was just trying to work out actually whether it was still a viable option. Bearing in mind it's 250 miles, I think it is, from where I live. It's a long way to go, just hoping that there is something still there worthy of the attention. But I did manage to get one in the early afternoon, weighing in at 10.9, having lost an even bigger fish earlier in that morning. So I spent most of the day, before I did manage that double, absolutely abject. I couldn't believe what had happened. But having that fish, I thought to myself, okay, I'm done on here. So I decided to ask a couple of friends as to what they think I should probably do next. And one of my friends, Ash, decided that, you know what, you should probably go and try the Don. You know, it's fairly local. It's only about a half an hour drive. So I thought, you know what, fine. I don't think I've got any better ideas. So I'm going to go and do that. So went up to the Don, you know, early afternoon. I thought to myself, let's just hope for the best, put a couple of rods out and just see what happens. The next hour and a half, 2 hours that ensued, I just, beyond my wildest dreams. Managing a 10.5 barbel fairly quickly, and then just 45 minutes later obliterating the River Don record. I thought to myself that those sorts of things don't happen to people like me, but you know, right place, right time, anything is absolutely possible. Had a couple of bailiffs come down, photograph in, weigh in, and they were more than happy for me to submit a record for the river. And a couple of weeks later, I was presented with a lovely certificate to keep for me forever. Hopefully, it never gets beaten. The Taff was an interesting one because I thought to myself, it's a very, very long way to go for a barbel. Notoriously difficult river unless you're local and you actually know the river quite well. I went there, gin clear, painfully low, and I thought I just don't really stand much of a chance here. It's quite a wide river as well, so my normal tactics, not something that I could do. So it was a case of bait and wait, and I thought it's not working. Lots of leaves coming down. It was that time of the year when you got autumn leaf fall. It's coming down in huge quantities, and I just didn't want to be sat there just recasting every 10-15 minutes, because even with 4 or 5 ounce leads, it wasn't possible to hold out. So I had to break out the rolling meat gear. Third roll down, what do you know? Off it went, and a fish just under 12 pounds was charging around out in the shallows, and that was the River Taff done. It sounds all very, very easy, but I tell you it's not, because there's a hell of a lot of graft that goes into the sessions that are blanks. There's a lot of time spent there scratching your head wondering, what on earth am I doing wrong? Am I in the right place? Am I using the right bait, the right technique? There's so many variables in play that you just don't know actually whether you're getting it right or not. So when it actually does work out for you, it just solidifies your confidence in what you are actually doing. And the Taff was a perfect example of that. Just stick to what you know, and if the chance is going to come along, you will get something. Luckily for me, it was what I was after. The Kennet doesn't really need any introduction in terms of what a fantastic barbel river it was. Thankfully, it has turned the corner, and the River Kennet definitely is is producing a lot more barbel now. I think more people are fishing it. There's more exposure on it as well. And my first trip to the Kennet, I didn't think it's something I was going to chalk off very quickly. But again, lady luck was on my side, and managed a fish of just under 12 pounds, which was taken literally right on the cusp of kicking off time. So I was quite fortunate with that one. Literally, by the time I'd landed it and taken photographs and weighed it, it was already time to pack up and go. So that one was right in the nick of time. So this is a couple of images of the fish. So if anyone's familiar with the Mersey, you can just probably make out a little bit of the background of the viaduct. With the Dern and the Don fish there on the top centre and right, and then the Taff fish is just there on the bottom left, followed by the Kennet at the end. As you can see, all in great condition, very little damage to them, pristine fish, and absolutely hard fighting, every single one of them. And then we go on to last season. So this, as you can see, my sessions fished was a hell of a lot less, and that's as a result of, because obviously the rivers that I had chalked off closer to home, I weren't revisiting them. So when I was going out fishing, I was doing a little bit more of of travelling, and unfortunately the Itchin was one of those rivers that actually really did consume a lot of time. I know I've got friends who've been very fortunate to go down there and catch fish very, very quickly. Unfortunately, that luck hasn't been extended to me in terms of the Itchin until very, very late on in the season. The Loddon, for any of those who fish the Loddon, will know it has its issues. It's one of those places that is very difficult to catch barbel from now for various different reasons. But given the amount of time that I'd spent on it in previous winters, I just thought, you know, I'm not going to fish it during the winter, start a bit of a summer fishing, see if I can find some fish that are a little bit more mobile, and first trip back to the Loddon of the season, and I got what I was after. The River Ribble is a bit of a lucky one, to be honest. We were staying at our place up in the Lake District, and the River Ribble was only about 50 miles south of Staveley in Cumbria, so I had the opportunity when the kids had gone to bed. Mrs. had cracked open a bottle of wine, which I didn't want to share, she wasn't sharing, and I decided just to take a single rod down to the Ribble down at Preston, and I thought, you know what, I've got nothing to lose. I'm not going to sit and watch TV. I can't be asked, so I'd rather go out and just do a bit of fishing. And yeah, it's there on the list, so I ticked it off, and I was home in time before the missus even went to bed. So that was a stroke of fortune. The Sussex Rother, a really difficult river, one that doesn't give up its treasures very easily. A river that I know people who have spent seasons on there without catching a barbel, and that's no exaggeration. I'd probably done 6 trips to that river before I finally had a fish. A big fish as well, a 12-10, not one of the real big British records contenders, but certainly a fish that I was more than happy to catch. The Colnbrook, very much a river that's not necessarily on a lot of people's radar, and actually I think even to this day doesn't even have a recognised record, although I do know fish have gone over 14 pounds in the Colnbrook. The Severn, as you can see, it's there on the list, but it took a hell of a lot of effort in order to get that. There are certain places on the Severn where doubles are quite plentiful, but on the lower, when you do get a barbel, they're quite often fairly big. But I just never got that luck. You know, I was catching 7s and 8s on the river, that part of the river that normally does 11s, 12s, 13s. So I wasn't getting that stroke of luck that had been extended to me on other rivers. Like the Itchin, again, very, very difficult, very low stock, but there was a couple of added issues that were thrown into the mix with the Itchin. If anybody knows what had happened over there over the course of the winter, had a couple of grey seals, had made their way up into the lower Itchin, and they were eating their way through the stock. So it made it very, very difficult to actually work out whether they had eaten everything, or if indeed there were some fish that were still sticking around, and managed to evade them. And yeah, quite late on in the season, I think it was mid-February, I managed a 15-2 off the Itchin, which was, it's not my biggest fish, but it's probably my most hard-earned fish out of all of them, because I just felt the amount of time and effort and distance put into getting down there in order to try and get one of those last remaining big fish. I thought that was the one that yeah, was going to evade me. There was coming to a point where I thought, I don't think I'm going to continue with this, because I just think I'm just spending too much time, too much money going down there for absolutely nothing. I didn't even have chub, I didn't have a bream, literally nothing over 3 winters. During this, you might say, well, go down there during the summer or the autumn, but unfortunately, if you know that area quite well, it's just full of paddle boarders, canoes, kayaks, wild swimmers. It's just not an option. And during the nights, there's other quests that I have as well away from the barbel, which were taking up the time. So I just felt that it's not something I would do. And I'd revisit the river every winter. Thankfully, on my third winter on the Itchin, I managed to get what I was after. And that was number 24 of the 40 completed. you see the one on the bottom right there. So that fish off the itching represented my third 15-pound plus barbel, which is off 3 different rivers. So it'd be the Sussex Ouse, the Don, and the itching. And I'm hoping within the challenge I've set myself a slightly smaller target within that, or not very easy to obtain, of course. So I'm looking to try and get 5 different 15s across 5 different rivers. So yeah, I'm more than halfway there on that mini challenge as well. But it's the bycatches as well that come along, like the big chub. You also, when you're barbel fishing, you're seeing big pike laying up in the margins and things like that. So it gives you the opportunity for you to come back in the winter having seen those, and it kind of all works out. They're all like hand in hand. And then, as you can see, go through lots of spam. I love my rolling meat. It's my favourite method, and it can be applied in just about any conditions. When done properly, it's arguably the best tactic that you can employ. A moving bait for a barbel, more often than not, they just cannot turn a nose up at it. There are some seasons that I will probably go through 30, 40 tins. Anyone knows how expensive spam is. You know, it's not a cheap addiction, but unfortunately, they need it. And I'd rather fish things like spam and rolling meat, but there are other, obviously, different brands available. Tulip meat, I'm just going to touch on this briefly, because anyone who knows who rolls meat will know that spam's actually quite soft, really oily. It's not the best rolling meat bait, so if you do want to mix it up a little bit, tulip's a little bit more tougher, more rubbery. It does stay on a little bit longer, but I like the attraction that the spam offers. It's a lot more oily, and it just seems to be just that little bit better. You got that edge. Excuse the baby formula in the background there. My 2 are a little bit older than that now. And of course, over the course of the challenge, lots of celebratory drinks. You know, the occasional cigar on the bank as well, once all is said and done. I don't mind a beer or 2. Yeah, so special fish. I think any barbel over £15 is beyond special. You know, it is something to behold when you have got something that big. When I was a kid growing up on the Wandle, you know, you catch a double figure fish maybe every couple of months, and we're talking scraper fish. So to be catching fish of 14, £15, it's a world away from what I grew up experiencing back in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Fish have moved on a lot since then, and even the Wandle has chucked up fish beyond the £15 barrier since. It's much like the Upper Lee in a lot of respects. Small, diminutive, crystal clear for most of the year, and lots of smaller fish. So finding the bigger fish is quite difficult as well. But sometimes when you've got a bit of luck, something like that can happen. And then that hard one, 15 2-bar off the itching, a very old fish. God knows how old, probably nearly, 25, 30 years, something along that, to evade everything that it has. You know, it's huge credit that actually would be able to survive what gets thrown at it. Seals, otters, I don't know if that's a little bit of fin rot on the bottom, or if indeed it is a tag, but they're still there and alive. And then obviously my personal best, quite a well-known fish on the Sussex Ouse. A hell of a lot bigger than it actually looks in the picture as well, because it's about, getting on for a foot wide. It's absolutely colossal. It's one of those fish that I remember forever. So that brings a conclusion to the slides. So with 24 down, 16 to go, there are a few things that I've got in the pipeline, depending on the weather. I tend not to, I'm not going to preach, by the way. I tend not to fish an awful lot during the warmer periods during the summer months. I will pick and choose, and I will quite often walk the sections first just to get an idea on how weedy it is. Are the barbel on the feed? Are they moving around? Can I find them? So I am thinking of the Dane to begin with. Has its own issues with the current issues with the seals that are hunting around the Castor area at the moment. Hopefully that will not be an issue going forwards, but obviously I'm there to try and pit my wits against the River Dane to try and get myself a double off of there. And that's where I see myself. So by the end of the season, I'd probably like to see myself with 30 on the board leading into the final 2 years, which is roughly what I've got my sights set on 26, 27 season completion, and then move on to something else crazy. Any questions? She thinks I'm bloody mad. I don't tell her. Well, I say that.
Tell her where you're going.
Oh, she knows where I'm going. No, but no problem at all. You know, it's all about balance. It really is. I know anglers who have lost marriages and families split up because of it, and I think it's sad. I do. There has to be a balance, and it has to be struck well. You know, I enjoy what I like to do, but also not at the detriment of family. Not worth it. That's a good question. I actually try to avoid syndicates where I can, because when all's said and done, I'd like to be able to say that I've fished free stretches, day ticket waters, or memberships that are actually open to everybody to purchase. Syndicates have their place, absolutely, and I'm not saying I wouldn't join any, but for the challenge itself, I would like to keep it at day tickets, free fishing, and membership. So if anybody decided that any of those rivers that I've tackled, that I've had big fish from, anybody could go there and pit their wits against them and hopefully catch. It's an expensive game, obviously, buying memberships. Some memberships I bought over the last couple of years I've not even stepped foot on, so there has been some wasted money there. But I think, day tickets and free fishing, there's some fantastic stuff available still.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, James.
Finito.
Really, really good. So, round of applause for James.
A rather nervous James.
Not at all. Really